Welcome back. Are you ready to start making the doors for our 5S compliant shop wall cabinets? Well, I know I am, so let's get right into it. We're gonna be making cope and stick doors with a clear plexiglass panel, which will of course help make our doors 5S compliant since we'll be able to find things in our cabinets quite easily. What exactly is a cope and stick joint? Well, it's really pretty simple, but it can be a little finicky to set up. This is what's called the sticking cut, and this is on the inside edges all the way around the door. The top profile is formed and this groove for the panel, all in one pass with one router bit set that's called a sticking bit set. Then we use a coping bit set to make the cope cut. The cope cut fits precisely over the sticking cut to form the joint, and there's tons of glue surface here, so it makes a really strong joint. This little portion of the coping cut is called the stub tenon. The stub tenon fits inside the groove and is the same size as the panel we're going to be putting in. Now, as I mentioned, this can be a little finicky to set up, but I'll try to make it easy and help you cope. Sorry, I couldn't resist that. Well, we're going to walk through all the steps from color and grain matching the wood, to cutting our rails and stiles to length, to setting up the router table, making the joinery, and then gluing up the doors. So let's get going. My wood's been jointed, it's been planed, and now it's been ripped to width. It's rested a bit. So before I cut the pieces to length for the rails and stiles, I'm just deciding which pieces should go where. Now you might think that's a little bit of overkill for shop cabinets, but I figure I might as well make them look as good as I can. Let me show you how I color and grain match the door parts. All right, the first step, of course, always is to get your cut list and make sure you've got plenty of stock. And since we're doing cope and stick doors, we're going to need some test material at the router table to get that set up. So I want to make sure I've got plenty of stock. I've done that, and then I started arranging them by color. As I arranged them by color, I wound up rejecting two pieces. This one is too short, and this piece developed a bit of a bow after it rested, so I just don't want to use that at all. Now, I'm left-handed, so my favorite boards are on the left. I've got some really straight grain with a kind of a pinkish tint to this maple, and it's a kind of a darker tan color. Now we're shading just a smidge lighter, still pinkish cast tan. Again, a little bit lighter, and this one is a little bit lighter, matches this one pretty close. And then I've got these boards down here that are really light in color, and I'd rather not use those if I don't have to. If I've got enough material over here, we'll just use these boards. Now, I'm gonna zoom in so I can show you how I've lined up the grain. All right, when you start matching up wood, what you're looking for is a pleasing grain pattern, but you need to be conceptually aware of where those pieces are going to be on the door and the movement that's going to be caused by the grain pattern to your eye. In other words, when you look at it, is the grain leading your eye in a certain direction? So there's a few things. First of all, like this is a really long board, and you could just line up the ends and just cut it and be done. But if you kind of scoot your boards around, a lot of times what you can find is you can find a really pleasing sort of look like this that can match up really nice. And yes, of course, these are going to be separated This is the left style, this is the right style, but the eye still sees that pattern match, and it becomes a pleasing pattern match. We're stuck with these boards using cathedral grain. Whenever I have cathedral grain, I like to point that up, where these arches are going up instead of down, because that naturally leads the eye up. And then the last little point I would probably make here is if you have boards like this where the grain is flowing off the board, you would want that to flow off the board towards the inside of the door so that the eye is naturally led into the center of the door. Particularly important if you're doing something like a decorative panel or a raised panel door that leads the eye into the center, into the most attractive portion of the door. In my case, we're going to do clear panels in the doors, so this will have the net effect of leading the eye into the cabinet. So once the styles are paired up and you're fairly well pleased with that, then it's time to start looking at rail stock. I've got enough stock here that what I'm doing is I'm cutting these to length where I want them matched up, and then I'm going back and finding rail stock that looks good with it. All right, well, I've got all the rails and styles cut to length, and I've got everything matched up the way I want it, and I've got it all labeled. So I've got my left style, my right style, my top rail and my bottom rail labeled. Everything is ready to go. So I'm ready to go set up at the router table to cut the joinery. But I've gone ahead and opened up the plastic that I ordered for the clear panels and the doors, just because I wanted to double check the thickness. Now, I ordered 1/4 inch thick plexiglass, and the reason that I wanted to check it is because when you're setting up the cope and stick bit, you can adjust the width of this groove and get a perfect fit. And by the way, you could get this plastic anywhere and cut it yourself. I happened to order it from a company I found a long time ago. They do a fantastic job. I'll put their website address in the comments section of the video. But they guarantee their dimensions to plus or minus 1/64 of an inch. And they ship it with nice clean edges, so you don't have to worry about any chipping or anything. And the plastic is covered with this protective blue film, so when your door is done and you peel the film off, you know it's going to look good. But like I said, again, you could just buy full sheets and cut it yourself. So let's go get started in setting up the router table. This is what's called the sticking bit. And this is cutting the long profile along the edges of the stiles and rails. And this is the profile that I've chosen to use. And remember that all the joinery at the router table is cut face down. So when this bit is mounted, it goes in here just like this and cuts this entire profile in one pass. That's the sticking bit. This is the matching coping bit. And again, face down. This will go through, and on your ends of your rails will cut the joinery that matches up to your sticking cut. And in the end, it'll look just like that. Hopefully even a little tighter than that. So that's what we want to set up. Now, the tricky part is getting everything aligned so that the cuts align and that your corners meet up and are perfectly flush. The other thing that we need to do is we need to adjust the width of the cutter that's cutting the groove so that it matches the plexiglass that we're using. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put the sticking bit in. I'm going to get all of that adjusted, the thickness of the groove, everything. Then I'm actually going to take that out, and I'm going to put the coping bit in and adjust that. And we're going to make our cope cuts first, and then we'll switch back and we'll make our sticking cuts. And there's a couple good reasons for doing that. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. to worry. I'm going to have some hold downs set up once we get the groove size correct. All right, I just checked that on the plastic and it's perfect. So we've got this set up. Now what we need to do, unplug the router table and let's get our coping bit set up to match this. So got a test piece here. I'm going to cut one more test piece just to make sure I have enough. This is the coping cutter. It's made up actually of two cutters and a ball bearing between. The bottom cutter cuts the profile. Again, this is face down, so that cuts this profile, which matches up with the sticking cut. And this top cutter essentially makes this rabbet, which produces the stub tenon. By moving the top cutter either up or down, you can make this stub tenon thicker or thinner. Now I needed to make it just a little bit thicker, so I put two of the provided shim washers in between this cutter and the bearing. And we'll run another test and see how that works. Plug the power back in, turn on the dust collector, put on my safety glasses, and we're ready to try a cut here. All right, once the thickness of the stub tenon is adjusted to get a nice tight fit, the next thing we need to look at is the height of the rail and stile and that they match perfectly. This does not. The rail is too high. The rail might be too high or too low, but we need to get these exactly right. Now, since this rail is too high, we actually need to lower the bit set. The reason is we cut this upside down, and lowering the bit set, we'll take a little deeper cut off of this profile part, lowering that in the joint. So let's go lower the bit and we'll make another test cut and see how it comes out. All right, I've made another test cut. We've still got a nice fit here on our stub tenon. And, oh yeah, there we go. That's just perfect. We've got no distinguishable height difference between the rail and the stile, and we've got a nice, tight fit here. So I believe we're ready to make doors. The question comes up, why do you cut the cope cuts first? Well, it's really pretty simple. When you cut the coping cut, you're cutting an end grain cut. And it's necessary to have a backer piece to stop any blowout. And if the sticking cut was done on one side of the coping cut, I would have to have a profiled backer board to meet up with the sticking cut. And you can do that, but I really find that it's better just to go ahead and make your cope cuts first. And that way you can just use any old plain square block of wood as a backer board. So let's get going. We've got lots of cuts to make. All right, we've got our cope cuts made for all 5 doors. Now what we need to do is we need to cut the sticking cut all the way around on all of the pieces. One thing I like to do before I break down the setup is to just check the ends of all the boards and make sure I didn't miss one, because it's really a pain to have to go back and set everything up again. All right, now you will recall that we made test pieces before, and those test pieces fit our cope joints perfectly. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use the test piece to set the height of my sticking bit. I've got the router table unplugged, so not to worry. And then we're going to have to run another test. And the reason we're going to have to run another test is because as close as this will get us, it won't be perfect. Okay. The last thing that we need to do, though, is we need to get this bearing on this bit lined up with the fence exactly. That looks about right. Now, before I set up my stop blocks and my hold downs for running the production work, I'm going to make one more test just carefully holding a piece of wood. Is it possible we got it on the first try? No. My sticking piece, in this case, let's call this a stile, is just a little bit high. So, what do we need to do when it's high? We need to lower the bit just a smidge. All right, let's try the other side here. We'll just put an X here to remember that that was the high side. Okay, now we've got it. That's as close to perfect as this old down-to-earth woodworker can get it. So we're ready to go. All right, we're all set up and ready to go. I've got my hold down system attached. One of the things that I do on doors when I'm making them, just to make sure I don't forget and mess up, I put a little chalk mark on the edge that's going to get the profile. So this obviously will be down and against the cutter. So we're ready to go here. It's going to make a nice looking door. All right, we've got the first door glued up, as you can see. I just peeled the protective film back a little bit to be able to get the plexiglass into the grooves in the door. I've only put glue in the 4 corners at the joints, no glue around the plexiglass. It's really not necessary. So I'm just going to let this set up for a little bit and be ready to do the next door. On the next door, I'll show you the glue up process. All right, ready to glue up the next cabinet door. I trimmed off some of the bristles on this brush to give it a more of a pointed shape to get down into the crevices on the rails. And we're going to get a little squeeze out here because we don't want to starve these joints of glue. I want to put in the first one and line up the end as carefully as possible to get it flush. Now I've taken the panel, I've taken the plastic panel And I've peeled the plastic back, and this time, just for the video, I sort of taped the plastic film back just to keep it out of the way and make it a little easier to see what was going on. So now we've got our plastic panel in place. Okay, and now we just need to get some glue in these other cope joints. Like I said, I'm putting this on a little heavier than I might normally do it because this plastic's pretty heavy. We want to make sure this door is nice and sturdy. Trying not to get any on the plastic though where it'll show. I emailed the company about what glue might work good with this plexiglass, but I haven't heard back from them yet. So if you wanted to glue the panels in, I suppose it could be done, but I'd need to understand the glue compatibility question just a little bit more. And there we go. So there's really nothing to clamp from a pressure standpoint from the ends. You could just clamp it across the sides. But I like to do this to make sure that my ends are absolutely flush. And it's just a very light clamping. And then I just lay, these clamps are nice and parallel and flat. So I just lay those across, tighten them loosely, and then go back and tighten up each of the clamps just a little bit. And there's really not a reason to put a lot of pressure on these clamps. As long as the joint is drawn up tight, you're fine. And that looks good. Got a little bit of squeeze out over here in this corner. And get that off. And I'm doing these face up, and that way if I get some glue squeeze out on the back side, it won't show as much, and I'll be able to scrape that off anyway. And that's all there is to the glue up. You know what? I think these doors came out pretty good. In our next video, we're going to drill the cup holes for the hinges. We'll attach the doors. We're going to make some shelves to go inside the cabinets, and we're going to put some finish on. Look forward to seeing you, and thanks for watching.